I'm just going to play a tune quickly just to kind of get warmed up and kind of get the vibes going here. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was a old ballad called "I Fall in Love Too Easily." My favorite recording of that is probably Chet Baker. And yeah, my goal with that song is just to kind of use it as a template to, like all of these jazz standards, I like to kind of take one of them and use them as a template to develop certain skills. And in the case of that song, what I'm trying to develop is just trying to play by myself and keep some melody going, either when I'm playing the head or improvising, while also making sure the listener has a clear picture of the harmony. So it's chord melody in a way, but it's not the same type of chord melody that I'm practicing if I'm playing in a trio where I have a bass player, because if I'm playing the song that way with a lot of rootless voicings and whatnot, it's a lot easier for the listener to kind of get lost, and they might not be hearing what I'm hearing, so I need to make sure that picture is clear. Yeah, so as far as supported melody when playing guitar, I think it's good to have kind of two different approaches. One approach being a very constant thing, that is kind of the way that you play through the entire song. And it's good to be able to do that first. So that one thing might be just to play the root and the seventh of every chord. So the changes for just the first section are just F minor 7, B flat 7, E flat major, A flat major, D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C minor 7. So if we're gonna kind of look at that as far as what that is in the key, it's 2, 5, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, or you can think of those last two chords as the 2, 5 to the minor. Just a cycle of fifths progression, very common in these standards. And then you want to be able to play those chords, but also make sure you have fingers left, because I can't do what Colin can do, to play the melody while you're doing that. So just taking the seventh and the root through the changes, it only takes 2 fingers, sometimes even 1, to do that, so it's really easy to make the melody happen at the same time. So that's one approach, is to have just something that's really simple that you can make a constant throughout the whole tune. And then same goes when you're improvising. You know, it's a really simple thing, so you can play lines while you're doing that. And by the way, ballads are really good because it's nice and slow, and sometimes you can play them free as far as your tempo, and it really gives you the time to think through these things and work on these things. Yeah, so that's one approach to playing solo guitar like that. And then from there, you kind of want to make it your own a little bit and inject your own personality into the arrangement or into your improvising. So it's good to have kind of this, I think, a library of voicings for a certain chord with a certain melody note as the top interval of that chord. So say we're talking about a minor 7 chord, F minor 7. In this case, the first melody note is a C, which is the 5th of F minor 7. So it's good to kind of have a bunch of voicings that you know are F minor 7 with C as the melody, or a minor 7 chord with the 5th as a melody. So there's a lot of ways to do that. There's, you know, kind of thing. And then same goes if it's a 5 chord, B flat 7, with the root in the melody. It's good to have a bunch of ways that you can do that, like voicings that are this chord with this function with this melody note, and you kind of build up a library of those kinds of things. And then when you go to play, you kind of have this constant that you've worked out that works throughout the whole tune, like we were talking about with the roots and the sevenths. And then you can throw in these more specific voicings that have become part of your personal library. And you combine these two approaches, and it starts to sound a little bit more organic and more spontaneous. And yeah, and then by the way, I think that goes regardless of what kind of chordal instrument you play. If you're a piano player, I think having these specific voicings and having this one constant approach, I think that can be beneficial. If you're a bass player or any other kind of string player that can play with harmony and chords, I think that can be beneficial. So yeah, that's kind of the first topic of discussion. Does anybody have any questions about any of those ideas to do with chord melody? I was sometimes sometimes I was playing the melody, sometimes I was playing improvised lines, but the approach is the same for how I want to harmonize it. Like if I can see my line going to a place where I know that it's going to be this interval over this chord, I can kind of think ahead and I know what kind of voicing I want, sort of thing. Yeah, well, I guess that gets into the kind of the realm of chord scale theory, where it's like depending on the function of your chord. So if it's like a 2 chord in the key of E flat major, the scale that you're going to play over that would be an F Dorian mode, like a minor scale with a raised sixth. So it depends on kind of the function of the chord within the key of the song that you're playing with, and sometimes you can change that. Like if it's B flat 7, sometimes I'll think about a B flat half whole diminished scale. Or a B flat altered, just to create more tension, so you can deviate from these chord scales, but you don't necessarily have to. It could be just B flat mixolydian as well. Same thing. So secondary dominant, the chord scales for those are basically, you can add as much tension as you want to them, right? But the default can be kind of filling in the gaps, right? So 5 of 5, say in the key of, we'll stick to the key of E flat major. So F7 would be a secondary dominant 5 of 5, right? If we want to change as little as possible and just raise our A flat up to an A natural, and I take the rest of the notes from the key of E flat major, I'm left with F mixolydian, right? But if I want to approach B flat 7 with a little more tension towards resolution, I could change more notes in order to arrive there from the key signature in order to introduce more tension, right? So there's always this default chord scale based on taking the key signature and then just changing all you need to change in order to either raise that third or flat that 7, which is usually how you get a secondary dominant. But you can always add more tension towards wherever that secondary dominant is going. Kind of makes sense? Cool. Exactly, yeah. Which we're going to get to all of this stuff in more detail. But yeah, these are good questions. I don't know. It's kind of, I guess, the painter's palette and a combination of, I guess you talked about physical ergonomics as well, right? So if I'm going F minor 7, B flat 7, and my melody is walking up the scale along the neck this way, I might choose a voicing that is physically easy to grasp with my pinky here and the rest of my hand kind of back here, right? Like, right? But if I'm going the other way, right, where it's kind of my first finger on this side of the neck and the rest of my hand on this side of the neck, it might be, right? And then from there, it depends on if I want to go or from the other side if I want however much tension I want to introduce to that voicing. So I guess it's a combination of like colors and if I want to keep things consonant or make them more dissonant, and physical, where my hand kind of is on the neck sort of thing. Yes? It depends. So No, usually not fifth, just because we're kind of limited as far as our voicings on the guitar. I mean, unless the fifth is the melody, right? In that case, if it's the melody note, it's super important. But the fifth doesn't tell you a lot about the perfect fifth doesn't tell you a lot about the color of that voicing. So I'll usually want something else in there. Like if it's going to be B flat on top and it's a B flat 7 chord, I know I'm using that example a lot, but we're keeping things simple. I usually won't go, like for instance, flat 7, major third, fifth 1, because that fifth isn't really doing much for us. It kind of makes it sound a little hokey. I might go 13th, flat 13th, or flat 5. The important notes that really tell you what the chord is are the third and the 7th of the chord, right? Because those are your kind of tendency tones. In the case of a 2-5-1, our third of F minor is A flat, our 7th is E flat. When we go to B flat 7, the 7th will fall to the 3rd, and we can hear that change with just those 2 notes. When we resolve to E flat major, my A flat falls to the G. So that's those notes are really important, but sometimes I will be thinking about introducing a specific sound or color, and I won't worry about that very conventional harmonic movement as much. Like in this case, like here's a 2-5-1 voicing I really like, right, where I'm just voicing my F minor 7 chord as an A flat triad with a C on top. So you can think of that as like a 3-5-7 of F minor. And then I'm changing this from a root position A flat triad to a first inversion E triad. And if the chord's still B flat 7 at that point, if we're thinking about that and we look at what I have now, I have my 7th, my flat 9, my flat 5, and my root. So we've kind of thrown that 3rd, 7th idea, we've put it aside for a second because we're focusing on something else. And now the resolution points are going to be more the flat 5 raising to the 9th of E flat, and then the flat 9 of B flat, either falling to the 5th of E flat or raising to the 6th of E flat. So yeah, usually fifths I don't prioritize, but if I'm thinking about keeping things a little bit more clear and a little bit less obscure, thirds and 7ths are what I would prioritize, but not always if I'm going for a more specific sound. Cool. Yes, Balam. If I'm not playing by myself. If I am playing by myself, it's good to include some roots in the bass because it's easy to lose people. But as far as an inner voice, I don't necessarily prioritize the root as like. Sorry, was that the end of your question? Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm gonna need to think about that for a second. Yeah, there's lots of ways to get adventurous. I guess. Are we talking about specifically solo guitar, or if I was playing in a trio setting? Yeah. So if I'm playing by myself, usually if you're gonna, I guess this would be the answer. If you're gonna go off track, it's good to first establish kind of the structure of the music you're playing. You know what I mean? So if you're playing jazz, there's like these things called choruses, where you basically play the chord changes of the entire tune. So the first few choruses, you might want to play things that are more inside the harmony in order to kind of get things established to the listener. And once that's established in your ear first, and then the listener's ear second, then that can maybe instill this confidence to kind of deviate from that. It's almost like once you can almost feel bored with kind of what's already there, you can start to search for more. Yeah, does that kind of answer? So once I've played like a lot of choruses to the point where you know the harmony well enough, I might not feel as much like I need to spell out the harmony as clearly, especially if you can hear where it's going and that's already instilled in your ear. I might be able to play things that aren't as directly related to that. We're going to explore a lot of 2-5-1s today with the time we have left. I'm not sure. Yeah, so 2-5-1s are a great training ground for being able to play things on jazz harmony and on jazz standards. One thing to know about them right off the gate, so say we're in the key of C major, where our 2 chord is D minor 7, our 5 chord is G7, and our 1 chord is C major 7, as I'm sure we already know. One other thing we may already know is that's a descending fifths progression, right? So the root of D is D, a fifth below that is G, a fifth below that is C. 2, 5, 1. Yeah, so that's the first thing to establish. The next thing to establish for this kind of approach we're going to be talking about here. By the way, I have some PDFs that you all can come down and grab kind of at the end of today with some cool voicings and ideas that we're going to try to get through here today. Yeah, so as far as the 2-5-1 goes, anybody hear of something called a drop 2 voicing before? You've probably studied that in this program. Cool. So a drop 2 voicing is basically when I take the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th of a given chord, and I take the second voice from the top, in this case the 5th, and I drop it down the octave. I get a drop 2 voicing. So instead of 1, 3, 5, 7, I end up with 5, 1, 3, 7. And it just opens up the chord a little bit more and makes it a little bit more spread out and also a little bit more playable on the guitar. Yeah, so once I've done that, I can then invert this shape. So I have different inversions. I can play a drop 2 voicing with my 3rd as the lowest note, the 5th, the 7th, or the root. Yeah, so when you're going through descending fifths progressions like a 2-5-1, there's a certain pattern that inversions can follow when they alternate with each other in order to create the smoothest voice leading. So voice leading is just basically the movement from one note to the next when you move from chord to chord. So the smoothest voice leading in a 2-5-1 involves having the 3rd in the bass alternating with having the 7th in the bass. So those two will alternate. The second two that will alternate is root in the bass with 5th in the bass. So say I'm starting with D minor 7, and I'm playing an inversion that has the 3rd in the bass. When I go to G7, that voicing will have the 7th in the bass. So my F is in the bass of D minor, it's still in the bass for G7. When I go from G7 to C major 7, the 1 chord, I'm then going to have the 3rd in the bass again, in this case the E. So first inversion, alternating with 3rd inversion, 7th in the bass. So those two will alternate with each other. The same is true if I start with a 3rd inversion chord. If my D minor 7 has the 7th in the bass, that's going to alternate with G7 with the 3rd in the bass. And then I'm back to C major 7 with the 7th in the bass. This making sense so far? Yeah, cool. Have you already learned this in your program? Cool. This is mostly review. So I'll try to get through it quick. So the same is true if I have my 5th in the bass, it's going to alternate with the root position. So if I'm starting with D minor 7 with the 5th in the bass, A, it's going to alternate with the root position G7. And same is true, it's going to alternate with a 2nd inversion C major 7. If I have my root position D minor, 2nd inversion G7, root position C major 7. Cool, so a way to develop your voicing vocabulary is to take one of those workstations of voicings where the 2 chords starts in with either a 1st inversion, 2nd inversion, 3rd inversion, or a root position voicing. You take that and you change it up a little bit, and then whatever changes you've made in one inversion, you can apply that to other inversions, right? So say we took this first one we have down here, D minor 7, 3rd in the bass, G7, 7th in the bass, C major 7, 3rd in the bass. And we said, okay, we're going to replace every root with a ninth, make things sound a little bit cooler, right? So my D minor 7, my D, I'm going to raise that up to an E. Give it a little spice. When I go to G7, my G, I'm going to replace that with an A. And when I go to C, I'm going to replace my C with a D. So I've taken this and turned it into this. Yeah, and then I want to see if I can do that in every single inversion. Just in every inversion I'm playing, I'm just raising every root to a ninth. That one's nice. Yeah, so you can do that, and then just do that same thing in the inversions. Say we did the same thing, but we made the ninth on the G7 a flat 9, so an A flat instead. Say we did another thing to G7 where we raised the 5th. Like again, we don't want to prioritize fifths as much. And we made it a 13th instead. This is where it gets kind of cool. That's probably my favorite chord right now. This one's kind of wacky. Say we took it another step and we, instead of making it a C major 9 where we had the 7th, say our 7th fell down to a 6th, so we ended up with a 6-9 chord. 6-9 chords are super cool because they're stacked fourths. So your 3rd is a 4th below your 6th, is a 4th below your 9th, is a 6th below your 5th. And we ended up with voicings that sound kind of like super cool. Did I do what I was supposed to do there? Nope. That's what I was going for. And then and by the way, it can be good to, as you're working on these things, make sure you're also hearing them as what they're supposed to be. Like if you're just playing them by yourself, it can be easy to kind of lose track of where the root is. Kind of comes back to what we were talking about later. So sometimes when I'm practicing that stuff, I'll just kind of make sure I'm hearing those roots. That way, you know, you can hear it already, how that's starting to. You can actually hear the definition of that voicing now, right? Like how does every note react against the bass note to get the full picture? And I'll do things like I'll practice singing the roots as I'm playing them. Backing tracks can be helpful if you have a looper. You know, whatever you need to do to make sure you're just hearing things as you ought to be. And that's what's going to fully ingrain them, because you can't just teach your fingers these things. You need to teach your ears them as well. What else was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, so that's like a process that you can go through to kind of experiment with some ideas to generate some voicings. And the whole idea is to develop vocab. So usually when you're developing vocab, it involves a lot of experimenting, and you may use some of it, you may not use all of it, right? So for instance, say you've gone through that whole process of adding the 13th and the flat 9 to G7 and the 9th to D minor 7, all of that, and you really like this, but you're not crazy about this. That generally means that this will become a part of your playing and this might not. Maybe when you're in that register, you choose different extensions kind of thing. But you're building up this library of voicings, kind of. And you're experimenting with things, and you may use some of it, you may not use all of it, but it's important to just kind of go on these journeys of just trying to figure these things out and put the puzzle pieces together, because you never know what you might discover, right? And then, yeah, so this thing here, that's like one of my main go-to voicings for a 251. Same thing here. This one here I just discovered a while back, and I like it a lot, and I'm trying to integrate it more. This one I have trouble. My ears have trouble with that. But who knows? Maybe that'll change someday. But for now, I'm not prioritizing that. But the thing is, if I hadn't have gone through that process, I wouldn't have known about the cool ones that I do actually like. And it's ideas like that that kind of end up giving you that library of here's the chord, here's the function, here's the melody note that you can incorporate in a lot of ways. Yeah, Lawrence? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Because yeah, as you go through a process, you might encounter, and you expose yourself to a lot of these things, you may encounter a lot of things that aren't necessarily going to be a part of your vocab, but you've been there and you've seen it, kind of thing. So it's a matter of just like, don't be too picky about what you expose yourself to, because it's okay to not necessarily use everything you encounter, but if you don't put yourself in that position to encounter it, you may miss out on something that is really cool and useful to you, kind of thing. Yeah, so that is a part of the PDFs there. Let's see. Okay, let's switch gears here, and we're going to talk about something that I've been working on for a really long time, and that is taking fragments of a scale, working them through a parent scale, working them over chord changes, and then adding odd note groupings to them. So that's a lot of different things coming together at once, but I think it's cool, so I think we should talk about it. So say we're talking about our C major scale. In a couple octaves. A really cool set of notes you can extract from that that sits really nicely on the guitar, but I think you should try it on other instruments as well, is this shape that I think of as 7-1-5-6. That's an example of what I call a scale fragment, just a set of notes from a scale. And once you arrive at a scale fragment like that, there's some really cool exercises you can do with them where you can, again, just go through the process, see what you discover. And that's to take that fragment and move it through each degree of the scale. So take say you're thinking of the 7-1-5-6 of C major. The next step might be the 7-1-5-6 of D minor. And then E minor, F major, so on. So you've just taken this pattern of intervals and you're working them through the scale. And then that can be the beginning of a couple other things you could practice. You could practice crossing string sets with it. You can change keys around the circle of fifths. So say we're going from C major to F major, B becomes B flat, trying to keep everything intact, but just making that one shift. B flat major. You get the idea. So you're taking that one fragment, making sure you're fluid with it in all keys. You can also do the same thing by changing up the parent scale. Anybody encountered that term before? Parent scale? So a parent scale is basically the home base for modes, right? So the parent scale of E Phrygian is C major, right? The parent scale of E flat, Lydian augmented, is C melodic minor. So you can do that. You can take that same scale fragment and then say we're in the key of C still, make every E an E flat. That gives you C melodic minor. And that's a cool... It's a pretty cool sound. Yeah. So that's scale fragments and ways to practice them. Who's heard of something called the altered scale or the Superlocrian scale before? We're all good with that? Okay. So your altered scale is basically the 7th mode of the melodic minor. And it gives you the core sound of your dominant 7th chord, the root, the 7th, and the 3rd, but it also gives you your 4 primary tense alterations, being flat 5, sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9 over your 5 chord, your dominant chord. So if you've practiced these scale fragments in a melodic minor context, you have access to use them over these altered chords, right? So back to the 2-5-1. Back to 2-5 in C major. And to complete the exercise, we're also going to add the secondary dominant of D minor 7, the 6th chord being A7. As kind of a way to start the thing again. And in order to make sure that we have full access to our scale fragments over every chord, we want to pick a chord scale for every chord that allows us to use every single note of that chord scale. So in order to do that over a D minor 7, we're going to think D Dorian, as we would anyway, right? Over G7, we're going to think G altered, parent scale being A flat melodic minor. And then over C major, we're going to think C Lydian. The reason why we think C Lydian, which is a major scale with a sharp 11 instead of C major, is if we take our C major 7th chord, the 4th sounds kind of crummy over that chord. The perfect 4th, the F natural, the F sharp sounds a lot more consonant. So by making that shift, it allows us to use every part of the scale over each chord. So we're completely free. So it's great for this fragments exercise. And then when we get to the 6th chord, we're going to think about another altered scale. So I'm A7 here. So A7 altered, A altered scale. What's the parent scale here? B flat melodic minor, did somebody say? If that's the case, then yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so B flat melodic minor, that's what we're gonna use there. So then we basically have a lot of freedom now. So say we took a scale fragment, one of these shapes we're talking about that works really well over D minor. That could be this right here. If I look at the intervals as they relate to D minor, it's my 9th, flat 3, my flat 7, and then my root. So E, F, C, D. So that's what I'm going to use when I'm on D minor. When I'm on G7, I'm going to go that shape that I'm taking from my A flat melodic minor scale and using it over G7. And if I look at the intervals there, it's flat 7, 1, flat 5, sharp 5. And when I go to C major 7, I use another one where I'm going to go sharp 11, 5, 9, 3. So this, I got and then I still got my 6th chord to deal with. I'm going to play basically the same shape I played over G7. I'm going to play it out over A7 but transposed up a tone. You kind of see the point here. I'm just kind of working up to the next kind of intervals that work over the chord with as little movement as possible, but kind of in an upward direction over these chord changes. So I'm just kind of making sure I'm clear enough that I can just keep climbing. Ah, dang it. I think you kind of get the idea. You can go back downwards through them as well. So on and so on. So those shapes are really cool. I like the fact that they have these wide intervals in them, and I like just playing around with just knowing your chord scales well enough to have that freedom to use any part of the scale over any one of these chords, kind of thing. Which leads me to the next topic, is rhythm. You can do a lot of these rhythmically. You can improvise rhythmically with these shapes. Over the 2, 5, 1, 6. But you can also do things that are kind of more specific as far as rhythm. I'm a huge progressive metal fan. I love bands like Meshuggah and Periphery, these gent bands, and I like kind of taking that interest of mine and seeing how I can make it work in this kind of music, which has led me to a lot of work on odd note groupings. They're also sometimes called cross rhythms, which basically are just groupings of subdivisions that are inconsistent with whatever meter you're playing in. So an example of that is, like, say you're in 4/4 time and you're taking groupings of 5/8 notes, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You may be kind of noticing that the scalar fragments I'm working with are use 4 notes, not 5. So how can this work? You can play odd note groupings by taking an even group of notes and leaving a gap in them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, and then I'll practice those rhythms with these kind of groupings. So. And it can start to sound really cool. You can take, so that's groups of 5/8 notes. You can take groups of 5/8 note triplets. Yeah, so while I'm doing that, in my head though is still the chord change is changing on beat 1 of every. measure as they usually would. So that exercise is super cool because it kind of built into it, other than it sounding, I think it sounds pretty cool. Built into it is just this exercise in gaining flexibility in your rhythmic points of resolution, right? When we first get into the practice of resolving tension, there's a lot of where your flat nines are always resolving on beat one of the next chord change, kind of thing. But because you're dealing with an odd group of notes, you're always resolving slightly ahead of where you typically would, or slightly behind where you typically are. And that's a good thing to be able to do anyway, because we want to, when we're practicing improvising, we want kind of as much freedom as possible, and we don't really want to be confined by resolving anything at a given point in time. That's too specific. Obviously, you don't want to be resolving to this chord, 8 measures down the line. But yeah, you kind of get the idea. Yeah, so that's basically that whole topic there. You can play 7-note groupings as well. You can also mix them up, so groups of 7 and groups of 5 to make it sound less predictable. Yeah, that kind of thing. And then from there, just through experimenting, it becomes a practice of, like all tension, just like harmonic tension, you need to practice resolving this rhythmic tension that you're starting to create. If for me, I've run into a lot of awkward rhythmic moments by trying to make this a part of my playing and a part of my improvising. And I think that's just going to happen a lot, and it just requires kind of experience trying to put it into your lines. And then eventually, I think you'll start to kind of be able to anticipate where the points in which you're going to be able to kind of get out of them convincingly, like you meant to do it, kind of thing. So it definitely it's going to require some experimenting. I mean, I'm still on the train of trying to make this stuff work in my playing, but I think it's super cool. Yeah, so that's that whole topic of scale fragments over chord changes with odd note groupings. Any questions about that? Well, I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, where theory can be a great journey to go on in order to discover certain things. Like, it can be a great place to start, as far as, you never know what you're going to end up with. But once you have identified the ideas that you like, or the concepts that you like from going on that kind of journey that involves a lot of thinking, and you've practiced them, eventually it can come from a less thinky place. And eventually you do want them to come from a less thinky place. Like, you don't want to be playing, you don't want to be on any gig and be thinking about, now I'm going to be playing my 5-note groupings over A7 altered kind of thing. So it's really much a practice room thing, all these kind of the ways we're talking about them, I guess. But I guess you bring up a good point of where you want to get to with all of these concepts, where you don't want to be thinking on that much of a cognitive or theoretical level by the end of it. But I think it kind of needs to start there, because if you just go with what's familiar to you now, and what's in that really what's in your ear now, what you're feeling right now, that stuff might remain as it is, and you might not be able to inject new material into that kind of more organic place, So it's kind of like theory can be a great place to start in order to develop new ideas, but you don't want to be, by the time you've actually developed those ideas, you want them to be coming from a different place when you're actually using them in your music, kind of thing. Does that sort of make sense? Cool. Awesome. Yes? Oh, so much importance, like infinitely important. And no, they don't have to just be guitarists. There's a whole other section that we didn't get to today, we might not at this point, but the PDF is right there for you to have a look at. And I got that idea from listening to piano players, specifically a piano player called Stephen Scott, who I heard is playing on a record by Roy Hargrove called Parker's Mood. And it's Roy Hargrove, Stephen Scott, and Christian McBride playing all Charlie Parker tunes. And it's cool because they're playing from a really modern place, but they're approaching all this bebop repertoire. And yeah, like I heard so many ideas using fourths, moving in whole tones. And that's kind of was the untouched topic of today. But yeah, that came out of transcribing piano players. So definitely lots of listening, lots of transcribing. I think it's the most important use of your time. Even though I didn't talk about that a lot today, I talked about a lot of nerdy stuff that doesn't have a lot to do with that and is kind of more just my own, self-indulgent playing around with nerdy stuff. But definitely none of the theoretical things like altered scale mean anything without the context behind them, and the way they have context is the context that has been given to them by the way they've been used in the music, and you need to listen to that music in order to kind of know why you're playing, that sharp 5 or that flat 9 over that chord, sort of thing. I think more important is just listen to records you like and try to, you can either just listen to them or try to figure out what they're doing, lift them by ear. Sorry? Video? If you can find videos of, but not all records have video to go along with them, right? So you might just have to lift them by ear, but definitely it's a really great practice. Yeah. Totally. All right, I wanted to leave you all with one last quick thing. So you are all in this program, and you all have these obligations of things you need to practice. You got each other's perf texts, you have your juries, you have your recitals, and you have a lot of things that you have to do with your instruments, right? Yeah, and then for me, things like all the stuff we've talked about today, those are my version of things that are really personal to me, right? So it can be good to have two sort of categories of what you're practicing, between what you're practicing and what you're practicing. Like one of which being like what's immediate, what's right now, what do you probably need to put most of your time towards in order to just get by, and what's that really personal thing that you want to have a part of your playing in the long run. And the former category, where it's like your obligations, that's going to make up more of your practice in the short term. But you want to integrate a small part of that really personal thing into your daily practice routine. Like whatever time you have, say like you have an hour to practice, you want to put 10 minutes of that hour towards that really important thing to you that you want to have that's kind of like your long-term goal. And then the remaining can go towards your obligations. But if you keep doing that over time, you're going to have this long-term relationship with these really kind of specific things that are to you. And I think that's a really cool experience. So yeah, just make sure you have time, that you make time in your practice routine for those little really personal things, as well as all your obligations. And you're going to end up with something really cool in the long run, I think. All right. That's been me for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.